Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to sign up to the book and the VIP newsletter at thehighestandbestuse.com. For the book, you can get that at Amazon, Chapters, Barnes & Noble, all of these places in paperback, ebook, hardcover, and of course now the Audible version as well. So grab the book, sign up to the VIP newsletter, thehighestandbestuse.com, and now to today's episode.
I'm Victoria Suen, and the highest and best use of my business is architecture and design.
Thanks for tuning into the Highest and Best Use Real Estate Podcast, where we talk techniques to optimize your land structure, skill sets, and time, as well as the highest and best use principles to make your business more profitable, productive, and efficient. I'm your host, Ryan Carr, reminding you that good deals are found, great deals are created. And today on the show, we have Victoria Suen. Victoria is the founder of BuildX Design in Toronto. She's been investing in duplexes, triplexes, apartment conversions, and land severances, and she did her first deal at 19 years old. So, Victoria, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is so much fun. I'm glad you could make the trip.
Yeah, thank you. It's always fun to, visit different studios and I guess see the new locations. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So today on the show, we're going to talk about past projects, number one, and how these opportunities could be considered highest and best use. Mm-hmm. So like whatever you've been working on, we want to hear all about it. Tell us about the nitty gritty and where the opportunity comes from. So tell the folks about yourself.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Victoria Suen. I'm an architect by trade. I went to school, did multiple degrees in architecture, and about 2 years ago, I founded my own architecture practice. So I got my OAA license, and I think just doing a lot of projects, not only for myself as an investor, but I think naturally people saw that and began helping them with their projects. And right now we're doing a bunch of I think a lot of them conversions, but naturally larger and larger conversions as cash flow and policies get improved to allow for that, as well as some commercial and like more design-focused projects as well.
Right, policies like forever changing.
Exactly.
In
it's
the Ontario
always,
landscape.
In a good way,
Yeah.
I think things are changing a lot faster than I would expect because typically governments move pretty slow, but I think they're responding, in a pretty good timeline, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the density is really becoming more favorable for the investor, where we could previously only have singles, and we went to 2, then we went to 3. Toronto's like up to 5 or something now?
Yes, exactly. Toronto, it's pretty cool to see and what that change will kind of bring to the city because, Toronto 4 plus the 1 garden suite, that would be really interesting, and unlocking all neighborhoods that previously were only single family. Mm-hmm. It'll be really interesting to see.
Do you know if development charges are still enacted after the 3rd unit in Toronto, or how does that work?
Yeah, so working on a project now, there was still education charges. It was about $2,900 per unit, but there shouldn't be any development charges up to 4 units.
Wow.
So yeah, they've waived that, I think, as of 2022 or 2023.
People don't know how substantial that is.
Yeah, because
that's huge.
Exactly. Depending on the size of the unit, but they're around like $90,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Take a raw piece of land, like that's big. Before you even put a shovel in the ground, you've got your servicing and your permits and your fees and a DC. You're hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things people don't realize in real estate development, that, the real estate developer isn't making tons of money. They're getting charged so much in terms of fees, and they do need to pass that on at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And it is partially because cities make a ton of their money from developers.
From DCs,
yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Something like that. So, yeah.
It's funny because with the supply constraint that we have, I mean, if we don't build, we exacerbate the problem. And if we do build, it's expensive. What's your take on this?
It's definitely a tough conversation. I really, that's why I'm not a city planner. Maybe it's such a interesting issue. Like I remember when I was in architecture school, it's always like a debate in terms of, thinking about, cities growing and how you want people to live. And at the end of the day, real estate development is a very capitalist kind of part of society, but I don't know, it's such an interesting issue to think about. I don't have any answers.
Yeah. Let's talk about school.
Sure.
So you went through for architecture. What did that look like and why did you do it?
Yeah, to be honest, I guess maybe someone at the age of 17, I did some classes in architecture, learning about visual arts, did shop class. It was kind of like a natural thing. I really enjoyed art. I loved building. I was fairly good at math and science. So I thought, architecture school could be a good fit. But as a 17-year-old, I didn't know what I was getting into.
Right?
Exactly. And I applied to the University of Waterloo, one of the, I think I would say, best architecture programs in Canada.
Nice.
And I got in. I think it's a program of, they usually allow 70, 75 students in a cohort, and thousands of people apply. And I did a degree there. And it's about 5 years. They have a co-op program in it, so it's great. You get to work at different architecture firms. Nice. You get to travel internationally if you want to work at different firms in North America or Europe even. So that was a really great experience to start. Yeah.
And then when you graduated with that, I don't know anything about becoming an architect. So is there some kind of an apprenticeship program that you have to take after the fact, or do you article somewhere? How does that look?
Yeah, so to be a licensed OAA architect, you actually need a master's degree.
Okay.
So a lot of the times, master's programs, you don't necessarily need a background in architecture. You can have a visual arts degree, you can have an engineering degree. So it really depends on the school. So I went and did my bachelor's in architecture, and then I did my master's in architecture as well. Gotcha. But again, some people enter a master's program in architecture from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And then after the master's degree, then you have to do essentially an internship, get hours, work under an architect. And then there's a series of 4 exams in Canada. The exam requirements are a little bit different if you're going to the US or a different province. Then you log hours, you do exams. It's a full, maybe around 10-year process to become an architect. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And then after those 10 years are up, what does that grant you? What freedoms, what licenses do you have once you're done?
You can be registered as an architect, and then at that point you can start your own practice, and you get a seal. So similar to an engineer, I imagine. Yeah, exactly. But as an architect, you can work at other architecture firms, and you don't necessarily have a seal because you only need a certificate of practice, one architect within that firm.
So you're working underneath.
Exactly.
Got it.
It's only if you want to start your own practice, then you have your own certificate of practice, and then you can stamp your own drawings and whatnot.
And is that where BuildX began?
Where did it begin? Well, I think interestingly enough, before I had my own certificate of practice, I was really interested in learning, even outside the office. So I got my BCIN. Yep. So even before having my official OAA seal, I was doing drawings and kind of helping through that means. And then after I got my hours and kind of could be registered as an architect, then I started thinking about, what else do I want to do? And I did ultimately register my certificate of practice through BuildX Design, because it's interesting. Once you become an architect and you're registered with the OAA, you can't technically provide design services without having a certificate of practice. So if I wanted to be registered as an architect, but then I also wanted to provide services through a BCIN, technically that's not allowed. It's some sort of rule in terms of liability, I think. So even if I wanted to provide interior design services, it's not something, that's under any, rules. You don't need a license to do interior design.
Right.
But because I was registering as an OAA architect, they would deem any kind of design service as an architect, you need a certificate of practice, if that makes sense. Really? So then it became this interesting gray area of okay, I want to provide services and I want to register as an architect, but I don't want to only be doing this under, the practice I'm currently working at full time. So it was an interesting dilemma. And then I ultimately just decided I'm just going to start my own thing and kind of figure it out along the way. But it kind of limits, architects kind of what they call moonlighting. Right. So they don't want you to double dipping and, where does the liability go?
Does it dilute the industry?
In what way do you?
Well, I mean, if you've got these people moonlighting, there's more architects doing the same work that full-time architects may be doing, but in a part-time capacity. Does that diminish maybe the rate that somebody could charge or how many people are accessible to the market?
I think it's more about liability at the end of the day. Okay. If I'm an architect working at a firm full-time and then I'm moonlighting in the evening, if something happens to this project that I'm moonlighting for, and you say the client wants to sue me, are they going to go after me? Or are they going after the firm that I work at full time? And how am I representing myself? and, where do those boundaries kind of cross? And then insurance is obviously concerned about that.
Yeah.
So.
Is insurance expensive?
It can be. I think it's dependent on, I think, the number and value of the projects that you do. But it can be pretty affordable to start. I think it's just, as you grow, it can get into the tens of thousands of dollars.
I've heard insurance for a PNG is like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It can be. Yeah.
That's substantial.
Yeah. And then depending on the project, if you're working on big projects, they ask for even more insurance for that specific project, and then you'll have to upgrade your insurance for that.
What is the difference between an architect, if we'd like to find what that is, versus somebody with a BCIN maybe operating under the handle of a draftsperson or something similar? What are the differences and what do they mean? Sure.
So a BCIN, they're limited to designing buildings 600 square meters or less, 3 stories and below. So essentially Part 9 buildings.
Yep.
In the building code. And then architects, they don't have a limit in terms of, what they're designing. So
go nuts.
Yeah, exactly. It always depending on your experience, obviously, and what you're willing to be liable for. Yeah. But it's kind of any kind of building.
Effectively, are they the same type of job? Just one is scaled larger and one is scaled smaller?
I guess like in terms of qualifications to get your BCIN, it's a lot less. So I think...
And I mean, more so in terms of the output. So if somebody with a BCIN is doing 600 square meters or less, whereas an architect has no limit, they're doing the same job of designing floor plans and street facade and things like that. It's just one can be of any scale, whereas the other one is more smaller capacity.
Yeah, I would say so generally. Exactly.
Where does engineering come into either of these professions?
Engineering has their own, I think limitations or like scope. So, retaining walls or certain structures at a certain point, then you need to bring on a structural engineer. I don't know exactly at what point is like the tipping scale to bring on an engineer. But for example, I was applying for a project in Toronto. It was 4 units and it required a PNG because, it had 4 units versus if you're doing plumbing for a house, you don't necessarily need like a PNG in that. So
once you go over the 3rd unit, now you're in engineering territory.
Well, that's what Toronto wanted. And I've seen other cities not necessarily ask for that. So I can't speak to engineering, but there is some sort of point when I think you go over a certain number of units that you do need to bring it.
I wonder if they'll roll that into the building code at some point. Like if this is where it's headed, if this is a trajectory, 3 to 5 units being the next stepping stone. Yeah. I wonder if they'll just start saying, okay, this is part of the building code, which means anybody with a BCIN, maybe you can do it, maybe like in time.
Yeah, perhaps. And honestly, like I've seen them even updating the building code in terms of definitions of like a house. So I was looking to this funny one where the definition of a house used to be, like 2 units or less. Are they going to change that with, Bill 23 saying is a definition of a house 3 units or less now? And they updated back when I believe they had I forgot what the act is called, but when they're allowing for secondary suites, right?
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if they change the definition of a house as they're allowing more units. And I think it's important because then there's compliance alternatives specifically for houses when you're looking at changing, the house into more units and the kind of construction you can use and solutions for that.
Just your drywall changes going from 2 units to 3.
It's exactly.
Where's your ducting place, right? It's not the same.
Yeah.
So when people update, it's like, oh my gosh, it's a lot more work than they anticipate.
Exactly. So I've kind of run into that. Like we're trying to use, like 1 layer of drywall. And you're allowed
no.
You're allowed to for a house. But then once you bridged into the 3rd unit, technically you're not a house. And then you kind of had to upgrade the type of drywall you're using. So.
Ryan, why are you wearing different clothes in this book promo as opposed to what you're wearing in the episode? Because sometimes we don't record the full episode at the same time all the time. Make sense? Don't forget to check out the book at thehighestandbestuse.com. Paperback, ebook, hardcover, all the different variations as to how you like to consume your content. Great book, lots of great content on land, structure, personal skill sets, and time. Now to the episode. I've got a development I'm doing right now, and I'm straddling pre-Bill 23 and post-Bill 23. And like before Bill 23 came through, this was a triplex, which is a small apartment building, and it's like a whole different zone. But then when the zoning rolled over into what we now know in modern times of, Bill 23 and beyond, now I don't need to amend the official plan. So I'm in between like all of this crossfire. I'm just going, oh my gosh. So I ended up just taking a step back, and waiting.
Oh, yeah.
Because like the policies and the politics of it are going to end up costing me more money to try to force it down the pipe, right? And I'm sure a lot of developers are facing the same problems with the infill stuff. Have you come across anybody saying, I really want to do this, but like the policy is pretty crazy right now. I think I'm just going to take a step back and wait it out.
I've definitely been involved in projects when it was like mid-policy change in the city, and those are the most frustrating points.
Or like an election year or something.
Yeah, and you're like, do I use the old one or the new one? And you're really just defaulting to the worst case scenario, which is obviously like the most expensive. And yeah, it's never fun because you're trying to learn at the same time people at the city are learning. Yeah. So they don't know what to tell you either. So honestly, like either you're planning for the worst case scenario or you take a step back. That's the only way. Yeah.
So let's talk current projects. What are you currently working on today?
Sure. So I guess one of the projects, it's a single family. We're adding addition. So it will turn into a 7-plex and that'll be in Barrie.
Wow.
So that'll be interesting. Yeah.
1 to 7.
Yeah, large lot and a lot of land in the back, so the parking will be rerouted to be in the back of the house, and yeah, the extension on the existing building will be big enough to support 7 units. Yeah.
Now, why go from a single to 7 instead of knocking it down and building fresh? Where's the opportunity there? Yeah,
so interestingly, this client, they're looking at that model too. I think they previously had similar size lot and they're building townhouses. Mm-hmm. But it was the way that the city wanted growth. I think they didn't want more townhouse developments. They wanted more like infill developments like this.
And is this rental?
Yeah, rental.
Okay.
Yeah, so a part of it was in speaking to the city and like, what kind of development do you want to see? And I forget, for whatever reason, they didn't want more like townhouse blocks. So it was more like a repeatable model. If they could kind of convert single family to 7 units and maybe have the parking at the back, this was more favorable to the city.
Interesting. So, what about servicing? All new services? How does that look?
Yeah, it'll be all new servicing, and we're looking to hopefully run it mostly electric, separate panels, and have all the heating systems through that as well. So, and
from a design perspective, are you encapsulating the existing house with a completely new street facade? Are you building out only on one side where you can see the original? Like, how does this look? Because the addition will be bigger than the house.
I know, yeah. So we're trying to keep, this one's funny, like we're trying to keep the existing streetscape more or less the same.
Yep.
And then we're going to blow off the back and then build back. Mm-hmm. So from the street, it'll look sort of like the existing house will be there. And then we're going to build kind of a second floor and then out the back. So yeah, hopefully it won't be, too much of like a monster, right? Like I think that's usually the main concern. So trying to keep the existing streetscape and then like build the mass at the back.
Any architectural control on something like an addition of substantial consequence?
What do you mean in terms of control?
So I mean, like sometimes when you do new developments, the city will say, "Oh, we've got architectural control in this particular lot or this particular neighborhood. Yeah. You have to have brick, or you have to have siding, or it has to be a certain color, has to be historic looking." Anything, any constraints that you have to work around here?
Not from City of Barrie, at least. They didn't speak to that specifically.
It's a bonus.
Yeah, or whatever we proposed, they were fine with. To be honest, we had a planner on board, so they were mostly the one negotiating with the city. But whatever we designed, we didn't have any major kind of pushback on that.
And how big would this building be once it's all done? Square feet. I can't work in metric.
Yeah, I know.
I can't. You ever seen a metric tape measure? No.
I know. Unfortunately, I have to work kind of in both worlds.
I know.
It's, I think, about 5,500 square feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that'd be what, like 500 square meters? Maybe? I usually use a rule of 10.
Yeah, exactly. It's roughly 10. So yeah, exactly.
That's a big addition.
Yeah, that's including the house. So I think we're kind of cutting off the back. And so like total square footage, about like 5,500 square feet. I think.
Any idea what it might cost to build this?
We're not at this stage, so I don't know yet, but I'm not really sure.
And how big would the lot be?
It's like a typical, I think it's like 40 feet wide and then, like 150 back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not a huge lot.
It's not huge either, yeah.
I mean, like we're not cutting up a farm here. That's a typical infill lot with the deep backyard.
Yes, yeah.
And to get 7 units on it, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I think there'll be more and more of these especially in zones where they allow for, apartment buildings. It's just a matter of, strategically and creatively thinking about how can I add to this building and add the units. So
any HST consequence there?
I'm not involved in that, so I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not the one. I'm actually not the client here. So yeah. So I'm not involved with like all the numbers, but yeah.
Do you prefer? Okay, so for something like this, would you prefer to be the owner, or would you prefer to be the service provider, like doing the plans, doing the drawings, going through the process with that person? What side do you prefer to be on, and why?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like it's kind of nice to be a bit of both. Like I would say, like in terms of the architecture design side of things, I've definitely worked on much larger projects than like the investment side. So it's kind of nice for that, right? Like when you're working on the design side of things, you're kind of pushing beyond like what you do on the business investment side. So you kind of begin to see like what other people are doing, and you begin to scope out like different strategies that are working for them. Right. So it kind of is an idea that I keep in the back of my mind. Maybe that's a project I want to do for myself. Yeah. On the investment side,
so you get to taste test this.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And on the investment side, I would say I've done more like smaller projects for myself. So I've kind of like dipped my toes into it, but I've like definitely not gone on like the deep end in terms of like development. But I would love to, get into that eventually.
Yeah. Do you own your own home now?
Yes.
Could you do some kind of crazy addition off the back to that at some point, and then?
No, it's way too small. Like we actually tore down the addition because it was like so bad and so poorly constructed. It had a roof over another roof because I think the previous owner realized that roof was leaking. So rather than rip it down, they built another roof on top of it. I was like, oh my God, this is the worst. Yeah. But yeah, I live in Toronto, so the lot is super tiny. I think it's like 17, 18 feet wide. Yeah. And then it's pretty short, like the back. So there's no development potential there.
Do you have parking at least?
We made a parking path, so technically we have parking. But
it's like the front yard, park sideways type of deal.
Yeah. So, but we make it work. I live in a small place, but like before that, I was living in a condo, so definitely better than that.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. What have you done for yourself personally? Let's talk about some of those projects.
Yeah, so like one of the projects I'm excited about is in Welland. It was on a double lot and had an existing triplex on it on one side. So I'm severing it. And before I was thinking of building a triplex because once I built the fourth unit, it'd get under site plan control, and I didn't think it was worth it to pay the fees and just get one more unit. But now with Build 23, I'm examining how we can make it 6 units instead, actually.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. One building, 2 buildings?
So one building, yeah.
One building.
So it'll have the triplex remaining there, and then hoping to build a 6 unit on the side. So
6 unit on the side or 3?
6.
So it'd be 9 in total.
9 total. Yeah.
Nice.
So existing 3 will stay, and then we'll build a 6 unit beside it.
Really? Yeah. Okay. How big would this lot be?
That one, I think it was only 9 meters wide. So I don't know what that is.
It's 30 feet.
Yeah. And then I think maybe like 80 feet in the back or something. Like it wasn't. Yeah. So
that'd be pretty high density for that one parcel.
Yeah, it would be. So luckily, the neighboring lot is also an apartment. And then also, at least in Welland, if your unit is 50 square meters or less, the parking requirement is only like 0.3 for it. Oh, wow. So if I do 6 smaller apartments, then there won't be a ton of parking required. Yeah.
Interesting. And then the actual demographic of Welland, would they support that type of thing? Like not from the policy side, but from the like the people that would reside in the units. Is that what they're looking for?
Yeah, I think I found that in the Niagara region, 1 bedroom or like studio units have actually rented out some like the quickest.
Really?
And they also have like the most turnover, right? Because naturally, maybe you find a partner and then you want to move into a larger unit. So a lot of times, like nicely renovated and made like 1 bedroom units actually do pretty well.
That's good. Price per square foot.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like for rental, it's the best.
Exactly.
That's the best. It's the best output.
Yeah, so I think it's the cities that don't want, all 1 bedrooms because they want to support families. But, if there is zoning and policy in place to allow for the smaller units, you can really, take advantage of that.
What about storage? You ever thought about storage on some of these sites, especially for people with smaller units?
Yeah, I think that's huge. Definitely in the Niagara region, right? Like a lot of them have like trucks, toys, you know, like, so I found renting.
The guy in a bachelor apartment with a pickup truck and 8 golf bags and all this stuff, right? Bicycles. Seriously,
yeah. Because I think a lot of them, you know, are in the trades, right? There's a lot of building going on there. And I found renting a garage, like, I got a lot of people interested. So I think I put up an ad, it was like $200 for the garage, and had like tons of people offering. And I was wondering, like, oh, like, should I be charging more? Like, I don't know. Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, definitely lots of demand for storage, I would say.
Where do you think the money is made in development, construction, in investment, like in doing what you're doing with this particular parcel in Welland? Where do you think the most money is going to be made?
I think it's from land to like just strategizing that it could be a 6 unit and getting that approval in place. I think I will also think about, like, say general contractors. I feel like they make good money, but like there's a lot of risk involved there. Same with the developer, right? So it's not just about like the return you're making, but like the risk involved in doing that kind of phase of the project. So for example, like right now I have a triplex on it, and there's been a lot of delays in terms of getting reports, but like there's been no risk on my side.
So like, because there's tenants there.
Exactly. There's tenants, it's carrying. Luckily the house is on one side. So when I sever it, you know, hopefully it's more or less the same. But, you know, I'm just holding it and then, you know, bringing up the value through the approvals. So I think because there's little risk in terms of this strategy, the upside is, in my opinion, like that much greater because of that low risk. In it.
Is that typically how you like to acquire properties? Buy something with a house on it and then go from there?
For the past couple, for sure. You know, like always extra land is beneficial, especially if the policies are kind of changing to allow for more density. But yeah, I try to take a very, you know, low risk approach. So I try to think about like definitely highest and best use, and like think of it as in phases as well, right? Like how can I get value right away in a couple like small renovations, or even like long term, and kind of mitigate risk in that way.
Yeah. How did you finance this one?
This one was just the A-lender. Yeah, because I had a triplex on it. So that's even
cookie cutter deal type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I knew it was on a double lot. I knew it would need a variance, but it was close enough that, you know, I was willing to take that like risk. And Welland's been pretty good at, you know, like working with people trying to do things like this. So I think overall is kind of a calculated risk I was willing to take. So
I've got a mentor student that did, he's looking at 15 units in Welland right now with, you know, assembling land and all this stuff. And I mean, he said that Welland was, you know, to your point, terrific to deal with for the most part. Like there's always going to be some bumps in the road and you get some people that, you know, don't agree. But like compared to some of the more, I guess you say, developed areas of the GTA, like that's a bonus. Being able to have policy that's in your favor instead of pushing uphill. Like, that's a benefit. Why don't more people go outside of the GTA to look for opportunity?
I think, I definitely had this mindset before. Like, if you grow up in the GTA, you're like, why would you go elsewhere, right? Like, why are you investing in this small town? Or, like, you don't even realize the opportunities out there. And even now, like, the Niagara region's grown a lot. Like, I think there are a lot of, like, smaller cities that tons of opportunity. But you kind of get comfortable in, like, what you know. So I think that's more or less like the reason why.
How did you identify highest and best use of this particular parcel before you bought it?
I think it was mainly looking at the zoning, right? Like I think right away it was a triplex. So I was like, okay, this is interesting solely as a triplex, but like the main reason I was interested in it was that extra land. And then like doing the investigations of, you know, what can I do with this extra land? Can I sever it? How much can I build on it? And if the deal already makes sense as just the building, and then the land is just a bonus, it's kind of like a no-brainer, like at that point,
It covers your downside risk. So many people go out there gunslinging, they're like, I'm going to be a developer. And it's like, cool, but you've never done this before. And they buy a piece of land, and they're like, oh my gosh, now what? You know, do you come across that in your travels, or?
Yeah, like even for me, when I'm looking at, you know, like potential land deals, like it's hard to compare, right? Like it's definitely like a jump in terms of like yourself as an investor, right? Like I think buying a piece of land with a house on it, like it's so low risk. But then when you're buying like land to develop, you need to think about like, you know, what's your like cost in terms of like getting the land right away, and the servicing costs, and then all the fees you're probably paying for consultants, and then all the reports you're paying for. You're like just constantly like bleeding money, and you don't have like tenants. So it's definitely like a different way of like evaluating things. So I think when I'm like looking at different land opportunities, even for me, it's like still like you need to be really smart in terms of looking at my numbers. So you're accounting for every single thing.
Yeah. I want to talk studies and timeline. So in terms of studies for this particular parcel, what did you need before you bought, after you closed, and then as you work your way through the process?
Sure. So this one, I got a surveyor on board. So they kind of survey the existing land. Then they provide like a sketch for severing. I provided a site plan. I provided the design drawings with elevations, and then we presented
Did
that.
your own?
Yeah, did my own. Naturally, save some money there, right? Presented that to the city, and they were pretty on board. So at the time, we presented a 3 or a 4 unit. And then it's interesting. It's pretty tight lots, so we are providing for a central driveway with easements. So both properties would use the driveway. Yeah. And then I think it was like 2 parking in the back. So we were applying for a variance on parking as well. Nice. They had some concerns about that, but overall they're still like pretty supportive. So they said, if you want to build a 3 unit or 4 unit, we're pretty supportive. So that was nice. Nice. Yeah. And then I think the only thing that came up in terms of reports is they wanted an archaeological, which is like very unique because I think within 100 meters, there was a site that found artifacts. Yeah. So that's been the thing that's been slowing down this project.
You ever see them do that? They go out and they like sift with
I have not.
Big trunk. It's so funny. They checkerboard the whole yard. Yeah. And they dig down and like they sift for artifacts, and sometimes they find bones or arrowheads and things like this. Yeah. And it's really neat to see them do it. Hopefully they don't find something on your site.
So luckily they didn't. They didn't. I was like, oh, thank you. Yeah. Like, so that was exciting to hear. They didn't find any I don't know, bones or whatever. But the registering and getting the paperwork process just has taken so much time.
How much time?
I'm still waiting on it. It's been like a year and a half, I feel like. Yeah. The report took, I think, 3-4 months. Really? And then, I'm just still waiting. So, wow. we put a rush on it and they accepted it, but I still don't have it. So,
holy smokes. What other studies do you need? So archaeological survey, what else?
Well, we'll need a grading plan, but like in terms of additional studies from the city, they didn't ask for anything else. They didn't ask for a traffic study or anything like that. The only funny one they specifically asked for was the archaeological, but everything else was pretty typical that we'll need to prepare, like a building permit, grading plan. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're going into a deal like this, I mean, how do you identify truly what the highest and best use may be before you even look at the house? You're like, okay, I'm looking at the dirt. What can I do with this? How do you identify where this project's going to go?
Sure. Yeah. I always start with like the zoning, like what does the current zoning allow for, whether it's with the existing building or without, right? Like I tend to like to look at, keeping the building and seeing what can we build in addition to that. But we can also like imagine tearing that down and can we build like an apartment or more density. So kind of doing some studies there, looking at like what setbacks do we need, what kind of parking we need. But zoning, yeah, for sure, like number one's like the biggest study. And I find between that and the parking, usually is like your limiting kind of factor. Parking. I know we become like parking designers. Like
it's true. How small can we make the space and still make it work? Like, have you heard of some of these, like in Toronto or Hamilton, they're using lifts now where they're putting parking spaces above other parking spaces?
Oh yes, I've seen them.
And like the concierge has to come out and remove the guy's car on the bottom and then lower a car down. It's very next level. Like it's something else.
Yeah, I've definitely seen them, but I've never been involved in a project using them as part of the parking count. So I don't know how cities feel about it. Yeah.
But I mean, like if you look at what a unit might be worth, that's how it justifies the cost of these abstract parking operations. Like you have to have a guy there to move cars. Like that's part of the daily. That's incredible.
I know. It's crazy that essentially, if you think about it, we're designing for the cars at the end of the day.
It's true.
And that's how it was like back when I was working at a firm. We largely did condo projects. A lot of what I did was like designing the parking garage because that would become the basis of the structure. Sure. That would then become the basis of like the floor plates above. Right. So it's kind of funny, like in some ways we're parking designers to start, and then you kind of, do some more creative aspects.
Is there a limiting factor how far down you can go with underground parking if you're doing the condo up above?
No, it comes down to like structure and cost, because like I'm not sure if you've seen articles online of like people in Toronto building these crazy bunkers that are like 6-7 levels because there's no like building height or restriction or building depth restriction, right?
Just keep going down.
It's really just a matter of like cost in terms of construction.
I've seen it in England.
Yes.
People were doing, there's a documentary on YouTube. I forget what it was called, like the super wealthy build, the billionaire bunker, whatever it was. Yeah. Right. And they just kept going down. And the very bottom level, there was like, I think there was 4 or 5 layers.
Yes.
The very bottom layer was an in-ground pool, which is the very bottom.
Yeah.
Right. And then one layer up was like the theater room. And then you go up and up and up. But they had an interesting constraint because downtown London in this particular area, it was all historical. They couldn't touch the building.
Oh,
so if you wanted more square footage, you got to go down.
So they just had like a big bunker.
Yeah, they just kept going.
Funny.
Right, they didn't stop. But they like all the dirt and the noise and the underpinning and all this it was insane.
Yeah, and I think with like if you're doing this in Toronto, like there's an extensive like river network, so I feel like that would be a limiting factors, because I've encountered scenarios where you're building a basement or kind of excavating a little bit, and then it's just like water pouring, like a river rushing through. So
never good.
Yeah, exactly. So in those scenarios, then you're essentially designing a boat, right? Like how do you keep the water out? Yeah.
What do you think sets you apart in all of these projects that you've done for yourself or for your clients? What do you think makes you different?
I think it's like the mix of the creative aspect of being an architect as well as like being an investor. I think there's very few that kind of cross between both worlds.
Yeah.
I find architects don't shy away from the business and kind of the numbers of it, but I totally love that side of it, and I kind of bring both worlds together and kind of see how it can kind of create the best solutions.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever notice, like when you're doing this, you've got your investor hat on and you've got your architect hat on, like when you're doing a client job, do you really have to consider the budget, or do people ever say, build the best thing that you can possibly dream up, and then we'll pare it back from there if we need to? How does that work?
Yeah, like I think we have that kind of conversation of even like what kind of services do you want me involved in, right? Like I think,
True, yeah.
And usually from that I can already tell, right? Like there's a lot of investor clients that only want me on board until building permit, but there's so much involved after building permit that maybe people don't realize, like getting together a bid package. Like there are more detailed drawings that we can provide so that it can prepare you to bid to general contractors and truly get apples to apples kind of comparisons for your project. And then we stay on for contract administration and making sure that the contractor builds to what we designed and ensuring that, we're on site and kind of do those reviews. A lot of the times, at least for smaller projects and investor kind of focused projects, they might not want me on board for that. And I can tell that maybe it's, not a certain type of project where it's like solely focused on the design and making it adhere to the design, and they need that kind of support. Yeah.
Do you think the design is where the money is made, or do you think the money is made somewhere else? Like how important is good design?
I think design definitely is where, or like maybe creativity is like where the money is made. I would say like when you're strategically thinking about the site, when you're thinking about what to do with the building and how you're going to bring the team members involved, I think that's where the money is made.
Yeah.
I think good design, in my opinion, is where money is made, but you don't always see it in terms of like, it's kind of like, I think when you walk through maybe a room, like a nice house, like you can't maybe always say, oh, it's because of the floors or it's because of the tiles. It's actually the collective kind of
just
overall.
Feels right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can't really pin it on one thing, but I would ultimately say it's design.
Cool. Yeah. Right. This has been so much fun. I mean, you're so well spoken, and to know, like, from this side of the mic, to know how, like, your depth is really impressive. The fact that you can be the investor, you can wear that hat, you can be the developer, you can wear that hat, you can see what's going on behind the scenes, the blueprints and the submissions, and you can understand the whole process. And I think from doing the show today, that really has shone come through. It has really come through, and it's really impressive. So, for me to you, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been terrific.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Ryan.
Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is BuildXLab, or email. You can find me at victoria@buildxdesign.ca.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Highest and Best Use Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Carr, reminding you that good deals are found, great deals are created. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe, and grab a copy of the Highest and Best Use Playbook. You can find that on Amazon, Chapters, Barnes & Noble, in paperback, hardcover, ebook, and now Audible as well. We'll see you on the next episode.